Hi, everyone. Thank you. And welcome to the Climate Change and Coming Generations event today. This has been organized by Religions for Peace UK Interfaith Youth Network as part of the EcoPeace Café series. As I think some of you are aware, some familiar faces, but for some people it's the first time. So I'll discuss a bit about what the series is and then also what the structure will be for the meeting today. So I'm AJ, I'm from Young Humanists UK, and I also have a connection to the steering committee of the UK Interfaith Youth Network in the UK for Religions for Peace. So this series is a dialogue session, the EcoPeace Café series, and designed by Religions for Peace. Its purpose is to empower youth from all over the world to come together regularly and to explore and share solutions, policies, and actions from their specific geographical context all over the world that can motivate and inspire and create a sustainable and thriving world for the next generations. So the structure of the meeting today, we're going to, after my introduction and just a bit of housekeeping, we're going to have a group brainstorming activity using the Jamboard software, where we'll share a screen and then we can all contribute brainstorming ideas, and we'll make a mind map based on that. After that brainstorming activity, we'll have a presentation from our guest speaker, Ishita, who's joining us now. And after the presentation, we'll go into breakout rooms for discussion on what we've heard so far up until that point. We'll come back from the breakout rooms with some feedback. And then finally, we'll close 90-minute meeting roughly we're aiming for. At the end, we'll close with some remarks from Ishita. And during any time during the session, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to either raise your hand. I mean, we're a fairly small, intimate group, so it should be a fairly easygoing discussion. But if you prefer in the chat or raise your hand, even during the presentation, I think Ishita and us will welcome that so we get the most out of the event. Okay, if there's no questions or comments at this point before we start, I think we should dive into the sort of icebreaker brainstorming session, just so we get to know each other a bit more and where we're all coming from. People are still coming in, so we'll just jump into it and they can come up to speed. So Natalia has very kindly shared the link to the Jamboard in the Zoom chat. So if you're, depending on what device you're in, it may be easier on a laptop. If you click that link, you'll go to a whiteboard. It's called a Jamboard, where we can all brainstorm some ideas. And then I think Natalia will share a screen. So some people who can't or prefer not to, if they're on mobile, if they can't add to the brainstorming, they can still see the share screen. So we'll do that now.
Those who just joined us, please check your meeting chat. So I shared the link.
Is it Interfaith Scotland and then Chamela? Hi, thanks for joining. We just did the introduction. You've not missed much. We're just saying we're going to start with the brainstorming activity, and there's a link to the Jamboard. That's like an online shared whiteboard that we can edit in real time.
And I'm going to
if you click that link, yeah, and then we'll also, it doesn't matter if you can't, if you're on mobile or if you can't join, we'll share the screen as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I jump in?
Okay, yeah, sorry, just to introduce Greshma, who is running the EcoPeace series, and she'll guide us through the brainstorming session.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. And so we have two books here, climate change crisis and climate actions. So we would like to hear from you, from your experience, like what are the familiar climate change crises that your country is facing, and also the familiar climate actions happening in your country. So please use the stick notes and you can paste it and also text on it. So yeah, maybe Natalia can show you like how to use it. Yeah, in the same way, you can also start using the stick notes. You can select from there and
so on the left, you will see the tool bar with all the sticky notes and other tools that you can use. And it is time to actually join. And actually, you can also change the color of your sticky notes so that it will be more visible.
yeah, and also you can unmute, and when you do this, you can also unmute and speak. So we can also see like who shared what. So please feel free to unmute and also speak.
We've got so far forest fires, frequent hailstorms, so very, very weather-based, and forest fires obviously are very much in the news in especially in Southern Europe. And drought, drastically different climate conditions in different seasons. High temperature, which has led to increased malaria in cases in some parts of Malawi. Wow, very specific suggestions here, notes. It's great. Extreme weather events generally. Maybe we can think about agriculture. That could be one aspect. We thought about the global health epidemiology, maybe also agriculture related crises. Our first climate action sort of solution, promotion of horticulture to absorb carbon emissions. Yeah, I always find it very interesting these days when you see very big, large companies like Shell saying, "Oh, we're going carbon neutral, net zero," and you're thinking, okay, does that just mean that you're pumping a lot of carbon into the air and just planting a lot of trees on the other side, and you're doing the calculation, or that there's a lot of greenwashing? I guess there's something to be said about leaving it in the ground, so not just net zero, but yeah, leave it in the ground is another way to think about it. Soil erosion, reducing insect population. I think maybe I'll add my own suggestion about the crop.
You can also post on climate action site. So some kind of familiar actions that young people or your community is doing at the local level. So you can also mention that on climate action site.
And if someone can see the board, but they can't because they're on mobile, you want to add something, please do shout out and I can do it for you. I know some people are joining from different devices. Hi, Matt. Hope you can hear us. Welcome. You've not missed much. We've just started the brainstorming activity. The first part, we're going to have a presentation later. If you see on the share screen, we've got a board there that we're adding things to. So we've got a lot of actions now. Going local in terms of grocery, yeah, the air miles for logistics, eating local and seasonal produce. And that's especially relevant for where I live in the UK. The local produce here is quite limited, but actually in our supermarkets, we have foods from all over the world. And you have to wonder, how they get there and how much carbon they burn to get there. Planting along shorelines. I've not actually heard that before. I'd be interested to see what the discussion is about that.
I think that's, well, I put that in. And
okay.
I think, well, this is coming from, living in India. So reduce, I think it reduces soil erosion, because with less plants less roots holding the soil close to the shoreline, there's more erosion into the water.
Right.
And that actually this next a consequence of that is flooding, because all the soil settles at the bottom, and the riverbed or the whatever body of water is, the water level starts rising, and then that leads to flooding along the shores.
Okay, so it's a river shores as well as sorry, for some reason I was thinking the seashore, but river shores. Okay,
I can see that river banks maybe.
River banks and shores. Yeah,
river banks
great.
maybe.
Yeah, and that's one of the knock-on effects of deforestation, is that the soil becomes looser generally.
Yeah.
Segregation of turbid water from clean water and reusing them for different purpose. And that goes in connection with the consumption of plastics being regulated and controlled, especially these forever chemicals and forever plastics that seem to be quite immune to recycling or breakdown. One more person joining. Any more things to add and put in? Especially if there's something very local to even your city or your country or your region that may not be applicable in other parts of the world. That would be very interesting to hear. I mean, many of these are applicable global. It's a global challenge, but if you can think of any very, very local ones, that would be interesting. Encouraging use of conventional energy. There you go, yeah, solar energy. I'm not sure we have anyone from China joining today, I don't think, but that's, yeah, they seem to be leading the way with emissions as well as also solar. And of course, we can put many other renewables there. We don't necessarily have to name them all. Hydro, offshore wind farms. Okay, any more?
I want to use here, but my country is not using it. But I was just thinking some countries, they ban plastic or use of plastic bags. So yeah, my country is not there. It's Russia, so that's why I'm not putting it.
I think less consumption of plastics is kind of there in the climate action. I guess that falls under that umbrella. Okay, I think we've got to a saturation point there. Shall we? So we can keep that there. Maybe you can take a screenshot of it as well if you're on your device, and maybe that could be useful later in the breakout discussion. Thanks, Natalia. Okay, so thanks for that. And that gets us some juices flowing and get our mind into gear for the theme of the meeting. And so if we'll move now over to introducing Ishita, our speaker. So I'll give you a bit of background on her, and then she can give her presentation. So Ishita will share some insights for us on climate change and the future. She's a passionate advocate for making a difference through policy and programs that make a quantifiable impact. She's presently working at the National Internet Exchange of India as a research associate and consultant to the Ministry of Electronics and IT for the Government of India. And that's pertaining to their UN engagement with the Internet Governance Forum. Additionally, Ishita is the co-founder director of Exemplar Education Linkers Foundation, which is a non-profit which works to promote STEM and social equity in education for social development in India, and that was since 2019. Prior to 2019, she was an intern in the Commonwealth, the Directorate of Economic, Youth and Sustainable Development for the Climate Change Division. She studied anthropology for her undergraduate and graduated with a BSc Honours, and concluded her Master's in International Social and Public Policy from LSE in London and Political Science in December 2022. I'll pass you over to Ishita. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So I can't really top that introduction of myself, but I really hope that today's session will be interactive because, as you heard, I have been all over the place. There have been multiple fields that I've tried my hand at, just because I think that that's the brilliance of right now, that we have so many opportunities. And the funny thing is that climate has been a part of my journey through and through, whether it's in technology now when I'm working with different countries, or whether it was in school when we were trying to advocate for changes that may be small or at a local level, but we did work for those, or even during my undergrad as a STEM advocate, it always comes back to climate. So I will start by saying thank you so much to the Interfaith Organization and to Grishma for calling me back and having me here. And so I will start with my journey with climate change, and then I would love to hear some of your journeys as well. So school, my awareness was very limited. It was mostly about, okay, waste management and pollution, because that was what everyone was talking about. But then it also got to the fact that we're at a tipping point. We're heading down the slope where we don't know how we'll come back from. 2018, I moved to Indonesia and I started going to climate bioreserves. I started going to beach cleanup drives. I started getting engaged with the community. And I learned so much about how pertinent it is to get involved and to understand the impact of climate change on everyone's life. And it was also the first year that why I called it out, because it was the first time that someone elder to me said, I'm sorry we put you in this situation. Like, we got you here and we're sorry for that. And it was the first time that I realized that climate change is something that's inherited for many generations beyond. And that's why we need to be even more mindful of what we're doing and how we're heading towards it. Later on, in recent years, we've all been hearing all the news about how we're in the global climate crisis now. We have hit every tipping point we were hoping not to. We have done a lot of harm, but we're also at a point where we're doing amazing things. There are new technologies that are trying to work towards mitigating so many challenges that come up. There is so much more discussion about climate change than ever before, I think. Even developing countries are getting engaged in the conversation in much more meaningful ways. They're trying to find ways where they can contribute in equal ways or even more at times by their local initiatives. And now that I'm working, I see extreme weather, and that's something I think all of us saw. That was something that really jumped out in the jam session. Everyone is noticing how extreme weather is impacting us as societies and as individuals. And the socioeconomic impact of climate change is a primary concern for everyone right now. So adaptation is actually trying to gain more momentum and getting more investments, which is amazing to see. And now that we're here, it's very important for us to discuss how we reach here and where we see ourselves forward. So before I go into the next slide, why don't you guys tell us about how you joined into the climate change initiatives? How did you get engaged into the topic of climate change?
Maybe I could jump in just to kick things off. This was through my my humanist work. But part of being a humanist is care for the natural world and from a scientific point of view and understanding our ecology. So that's how I got involved. Anyone else?
For me, it was when I started going into the STEM field and doing multiple projects for STEM, I realized that these projects somehow or the other were affecting climate change, and we did not realize, but we were giving solutions, but the solutions were not necessarily a proper or sustainable solution. Somehow or the others, that solution was generating a new problem and leading to climate change or leading in that factor.
That is actually really nice to hear, because that's about being mindful about what you're doing and how you're engaging with it as well.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, last year I have attended a seminar where I have firstly introduced to the climate crisis. Actually, I am doing art history discipline MPhil. So I have met few of the artists. So I have discussed with them the role of art in the climate change. I have discussed different kind of role, like create a large scale of art installation. In the term of like we are in the context of Pakistan, India, like there we have different issues like agriculture vulnerability and the different other issues, energy demand and supply. I have engaged them to make art to evoke the people's emotion indifferently, like installation of art pieces like paint murals and create street art that celebrates sustainable transport modes and making urban spaces more appealing and encouraging people to adopt eco-friendly, so on. So that's what I'm right now and doing.
That's amazing. Anyone else who wants to add?
And maybe I can go next. So yeah, like for us, we started EcoPeace Teen Cafe to have dialogues mostly on climate change and peace building. So we involve young people to initiate climate actions at the local community. And also through climate action, we are trying to build peace and harmony in their community. So we are basically turning the challenges to opportunities to include and create an inclusive community to bring out climate actions from all the possible ways. Yeah, thank you.
Hi. Well, I was thinking from interfaith viewpoint and how I could fit in my answer from that viewpoint. And I was thinking, actually, you know, it's a good opportunity for me to reflect on a bit on this. Coming from Turkey, it's where Islamic culture is quite dominant, although Islam is obviously, like many other religions, are interpreted and practiced in many different ways. But environment has been always central in the way in our cultural ways, and this is quite through religion itself, like keeping your surrounding clean, consuming adequately. So, for instance, like not exaggerating in your consumption, but yeah, these have been quite central, and I think environmentally speaking, they are quite important values, right? I'm sorry, talking environmentally, it's just fireworks. I don't know if you can hear them. It's a bit loud. So, and apart from that, right now I work as a researcher in a project in which we are looking at how like how environmental values are intergenerationally transmitted in humanist families. So it's also like an aspect, non-religious aspect, which is, you know, from an interview standpoint, it can be meaningful. Yeah, that's how I sort of, these are the ways I like environment has always came across with my way of living.
That's amazing.
I echo what I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Elif.
Yeah.
Yes. But yes, a lot of what you said resonated with me as well. I think I don't think I thought about it very consciously when I was growing up, but looking back, I think a lot of cultural and faith-related practices that have been a part of my everyday life do connect a lot with thinking about the environment, being very environmental conscious and all that. And now with my work, well, in 2021, Glasgow was a host for COP26, and our organization was very involved with all that. So we had a lot of interactions, and I think at that was, I think, possibly that's where in my lifetime, I think the peak of my involvement with the climate change or just environmental, the cause, I think that was probably where it was the peak, I think.
I think for me, I've been involved in the peace movement for many years. And I think there's kind of just a growing awareness and a growing focus now on how peace, kind of conflict and the environment are all kind of interrelated, and how kind of working to promote one or work to promote the other. And I think that's where my awareness is coming from.
Anyone else wants to join before we move ahead? Or we can actually circle back to this as well.
We'll have time in the breakout discussion period as well. Thanks, Ishita.
So it's really good to hear everyone's journey with this as well, because it's something that I think the minute I saw the topic, that was again something that came to me, that climate change always comes to the coming generation or to the people who are inheriting the climate. And it often comes back to why us, why the youth, why the coming generation. So there's a lot of things that are a part of this, at least from my perspective. What I've learned is that it's a very unique and unusual challenge, right? It's not something the generations before us ever really thought about a lot. So it's a lot of political, it's a lot of introspective, it's a lot of social thinking, it's a lot of personal thinking about why do we care that humanity should survive? Why do we care about what is going to happen to the coming generations? About how our decisions and how our actions today will actually affect future generations beyond survival, but also their identity. Will they be able to see the same world we see? Will they be able to see the same countries we see the way we see them now? The biggest example of this is what's happening in Hawaii right now. The fact that an entire city was changed and nobody would know it in the same way is something that we have to consciously understand and imbibe, that this is something that we need to mitigate. We need to find a way to ensure that the coming generations see the world in the same way we see, because it is that evolutionary pattern that really matters. So how do we imagine the lives of people 50 to 100 years from now being born? How will they lead their lives? And maybe if we acted otherwise, could we have done something more? Is something that we need to start questioning and including into our conversations. So that brings us to the next slide, which is the front line of climate doomism. I think that's something I personally find very challenging nowadays. Is we're bombarded with information about how bad things are. It's from everywhere, from all sides, at all levels. Even in schools nowadays, I have my younger brother coming up to me and telling me about, oh, this drastic climate event happened, and I don't understand it. I don't understand how that could even happen. And for someone like me, it's very difficult to try and explain to that child that, okay, this is probably because of something that happened in society or something that's changed, that you'll have to experience maybe even more drastic climate events in the future. So it's a challenge, but then the coming generation they're native to digital information, and they're so much better equipped to recognize and actually work with these challenges than I think any of us ever were. So that's the amazing thing that happens. And it's also the aspect of viewing climate change more holistically. So instead of just seeing the climate impact, something that I love about the organization as well is thinking about the socioeconomic impact of it, thinking about the physical and the mental impact of climate change and how we work to mitigate that as a society. So that's something really good. And it's also the amount of socioeconomic chaos that we see around ourselves nowadays. I think the coming generation has a lot of stronger input of realism than anyone else. So they actually see these challenges in action, and they know that they need to fix it. They need to be part of this conversation. We need to make sure that they feel part of this conversation. So again, the fact that the statistics on your screen are rather alarming. If across 10 countries, we have 10,000 teens being interviewed and 3/4 of them being afraid of the future, is not something that we want our legacy to be, and is not something we want their future to be. So there are a lot of effective adaptation practices that we see. There's a lot of adaptation that we discussed in the jam session as well. There's also a lot of initiatives happening as a society where we're talking about soil moisture conservation, we're talking about agroforestry, we're talking about community-led action, we're talking about agroecological practices that are healthier for the world and that are healthier for our societies. So it's also adapting those to different needs in different countries that is very increasingly important, because as we were mentioning, that a lot of solutions that you came up with were global, but it's also adapting those globals to local needs, to indigenous needs, that's becoming more and more important, because that is a lag that is very evident in mitigation challenges right now, where we have the North and the developed countries having being much better equipped to deal with these, whereas the developing countries and sometimes many countries in the global South are still trying to catch up to that level of development. So there's this differentiation where they need to sort of focus on adaptation, build their systems and mechanisms in a much better way. And with the climate crisis being a dynamic crisis, it keeps increasing. It becomes complex more and more every day. So it's also the fact that when these complex phenomena, they interact with one another, we are seeing in a lot of compounded risks being developed for the coming generation. So it's no longer something that you see isolated. So when we talk about climate change and technology now, it's not really ever limited to, oh, we need this technological solution for this specific problem. It has to be, okay, let's say we are trying to put in better infrastructure for our society. We want to plan new cell phone towers. We need better infrastructure to adapt to the coming information technology. The challenge is, how does that affect the climate? How does that affect the societies around it? Will people be accepting of these changes? How will these changes impact generations to come, if not have an immediate impact? So the long-term impact of our actions is something that's being discussed more and more, which is amazingly promising and great to see. So our generation knows how to thrive. We do continue to do that. We've just come out of a pandemic, and I think we've done amazingly well to come out of it and build a better future. And it just makes me excited to see what more we can do in climate change. So not to add to the doomism, but this is just a recap of what's been happening in climate recently. We know from the latest IPCC report that a lot of people are becoming increasingly vulnerable to climate change. It's something that we do see, and it's something that we need to be more mindful of. The magnitude of climate finance is flowing towards changes, yes, but also mitigation. So there's this difference between how much is being invested into adaptation. We'll cover the difference between both those approaches later on, but essentially the thing is that mitigation is more about combating climate change after it happens, but adaptation is about making sure it doesn't increase even further. So we need to build more investment and more discussion around adaptation, about how we need to proactively stop challenges from arising in our communities. Even though I say it is likely that warming will exceed, we are getting new reports every hour that we pretty much have crossed that threshold as well. In the near term, every region in the world is projected to face increased climate hazards, which is unfortunately a fact we have to face. And a continued focus on prevention is a long-term plan, but we do need to also understand the pace of this climate is not something we're matching up with. Our technologies or our approaches need to sort of also have an immediate effect. We need to discuss what can we do to have a shorter term and a long-term goal both, because till now we've been seeing it as an impending crisis. But now that we are in the midst of the crisis, our approach needs to change just a little bit, in my perspective, and from what I see the discussion being around in most sectors. It's always about, okay, climate change is happening, the temperature is rising. The challenge is it's already happened. We are already seeing impacts in many drastic ways that are very unfortunate. So that discussion needs to twist a little and become more proactive and more fast-paced. this is also about the evolution of climate change. I did hear some examples from Elif and Aparna both about how their culture actually incorporates traditional practices about climate conservation. But if anyone else has any more examples they'd like to share. For example, in Indonesia, when we went to a conserve in Bali, and it was the first time that I was introduced to animism as a concept, where they spoke to me about how every living thing has its own soul, its own journey, and we have to be considerate about every blade of grass we step on, every mountain we climb. They have this inherent practice of asking permissions, having prayers before they embark on a journey on a mountain, having certain traditions that maybe in the modern world we don't really see that often, but they come from a mutual respect for nature. And also somewhat, for me, it was very introspective because it was the first time that I was told, okay, you're supposed to knock on a room before you enter. It was something that seems so mundane when you think about it, but just that 1 minute of hesitancy before you enter something, it makes you think about, okay, I am going into a different environment, I'm changing where I'm going, and it just makes you more mindful of your actions. So there are these small practices that I think are embedded in every society that if we highlight more on, maybe we can actually generate this innate awareness in the coming generations about how it's just the 1 second of you thinking about a bigger picture that can really change a lot. So if anyone else would like to share any specific cultural practices, or even if Elif or Aparna want to elaborate on what they were saying previously.
Maybe I could just chip in here and say that although it's not my own culture, but I have spent some time living there, and I do really admire their relationship with nature. Japanese culture has a very, very deep connection with nature. It's a very small, relatively small island. I mean, coming from living in the UK, it's sort of more or less the same size, but they have just a huge amount more forests, rivers. You can drive half an hour, 1 hour outside of the city in any big city, and you'll be lost in the middle of a mountain forest. They keep their bustling cities, as well as also keeping it very close to very wild and free nature reserves. And they also have a tradition of ancestral worship and connection to, okay, when ancestors pass on, then they become sort of forest spirits. And you can see that in the anime, which is how I found out about it initially, in their stories. Because they keep up with, okay, even a Hollywood level, feature films have that tradition in them, so they are passing it on to the next generation.
That's interesting. I actually think cultural references are really important in upcoming literature, and that's why even Mohammed, when he spoke about art being a medium for climate change, I think it's really important to get that imagery, to get those stories across to the coming generations. Someone else was saying something, sorry.
No, that was just myself. So yes, I'm from a Hindu background, growing up in a Hindu family, and you were asking, about how a certain cultural or associations. One of the things that I do when I wake up first thing in the morning is, with my morning prayers, the first thing I do is I pray to nature. It's part of this thing. So part of the prayer says, I apologize for inward through the rest of my day. I will try to be mindful, but I apologize for any accidental or any inadvertent harm that I may cause to you. So while it was a prayer that was just taught to me as a kid, that my parents just told me, say that first thing in the morning. Now, when I learned enough to know the meaning behind what I was saying, I started to be mindful about my actions during the day as well. So while as a kid, it was just taught, and it was taught to like a lot of my, people, my cousins, contemporaries and all that. So while in the beginning, at that age, the meaning may have, gone over my head, even if they had mentioned it to me. Thinking about it now, it's sort of like a reinforcement the first thing in the morning, that you make sure that you're mindful about your actions. And also a lot of worship I've noticed in a lot of very, very rural parts of South India particularly, is the some of the villages, very, very, very rural villages, I've noticed people have their worship tied around the oldest tree in their area. So and they make sure to the daily ritual practice, it goes along with maintaining, the and not just the tree. So what happens is, when you have that oldest tree, it comes with the ecosystem of that area as well, because that particular tree obviously probably caters to a lot of local wildlife as well. So there'll be like snakes nearby, snake pit nearby, there'll be birds nesting on the tree. So when they take that effort to, when they consider that particular tree sacred, they take the effort to make sure that it's standing, and that they take care of the tree as well. And having that particular faith aspect tied in with that ensures that the local ecosystem has a good chance of survival, continued survival as well, and maintaining that.
What Ishita was telling about asking permission, which is like such a delicate thing to do, such a sensitive way of thinking, and I think it's quite common in ancient world views and many religions as well. The permission, but it's also I think it's also quite important that how the culture was considering mountains as we, to our human senses, we consider them non-living, but the culture considers them as being, whether living or not, to our perceptions. So it's important that we do an agreement about our entrance to their space. It also reminded me of the Islamic culture, and it's because this is what I'm quite familiar with, being born and raised here. So we do have a word for sort of like when we are about to do something new and act, like even getting on a bus, getting off a bus. We say, I mean, not all of us, most consider it quite religious term. We might say Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, which also contains the name of God itself. And since that environment, human or any other entity is not really considered separate from the perception of God. So it's like, what you do to the environment is to do yourself, to God, or to do anything, to the whole system, because there's no separation. It's all about unity. So it also, even the way of pronouncing the whole word itself, it's in Arabic, it's not in Turkish, but it just gives you a second of, taking the breath, sort of like, being mindful about you are actually transiting from one space, one unit of a time to another. So I kind of like love to see how these things are common, but manifested in quite different ways, and this is like enriches me.
That's actually something I think anthropology did for me. It made me realize about how so many cultural evolutions are very similar, but they manifest in very different ways in maybe religious practice or social practices of the area. And you'll see traces of it somewhere else, and you'll suddenly feel like, okay, this maybe was connected somewhere really long back. But it's really great to see that happen. And it's what makes me sad that this is not part of the modern discussion on climate change as much as it should be. So if you see the next points, modern society, when we try to trace our discussions about climate change, they're often on the UN panels, mostly going to the First Earth Summit, or then going to the IPCC, going to the climate change working groups that we have now. we have amazing things for intergovernmental cooperation on climate change. It's undeniable that we need this, but it's also something that I feel that human touch of having these cultural practices being so deeply embedded in our culture, being so deeply embedded in our societies, but not reflecting as much as they can in modern discussion. So that is something that I think most panels are actually now striving to do. They're becoming much more sensitive to the needs of incorporating social aspects of climate change into their discussion, which is amazing. The new, I think it was in the General Assembly this year, maybe, where they also spoke about that whenever we talk about including indigenous populations into climate change, it's also important to add culture and religion to the discussion, because they may not be considered in the same bracket, but they also have these small practices that are always geared towards climate conservation in very different ways, but in very meaningful ways for a lot of people around the world. So that is, I think, something that we've lost when we talk about the discourse around climate change, but I think it's something that we need to bring back. It's something that I always, whenever I meet somebody who's advocating for climate change, I always tell them, maybe talk a little about the traditional aspect of it as well, just because I think these are beautiful practices that are getting lost in the passage of time, and they really shouldn't. So when we then talk about the role in global society, I honestly feel like saying this is a bit redundant because all of you understand this amazingly, but it's also, there's a lot to do about what role an individual plays. And I think that's even becoming more and more concerning, because we have these big companies, we have these corporations who claim to be doing their bit, then we hear something completely opposite to that. Nobody can really know which story is true, which story isn't. So sometimes we do get lost in this conversation that, okay, what can I as an individual actually do if we don't get the bigger sectors to cooperate, we don't get countries to cooperate, what is one individual going to do? But I think it's also important that we discuss the fact that every individual has a bigger role to play. And it's just something to consider that there are regions where people have so many vulnerabilities to climate change. They're facing it every day. They come up with really ingenious solutions in local communities to actually combat these challenges and face these challenges. So it's really important to actually pay attention to that as well. I mean, I remember there's one statistic I have for this, that the climate events that have been happening, apparently between 2010 and 2020, human mortality from floods, droughts, storms were 15 times higher in the highly vulnerable regions. That is an alarming statistic, and that is something that also feeds to the conversation that the global impact is so high that even the smallest effort that an individual makes feeds into a bigger channel of things, figures into the grander scheme of things. So you need to find ways where even an individual needs to feel important in contributing to their society. And that's where I think these practices also come in, where you should not feel demotivated that, okay, I don't see big tech doing anything. I don't see big pharma doing anything. I don't see my country giving it enough investment or enough attention. But it's about the fact that ambitious mitigation can only happen if every individual is involved at their own capacity. It can be being mindful of what you buy at a supermarket. It can be reusing plastic. It can be working as a community to say, okay, we're going to limit our plastic usage as much as we can. We're going to set up a recycling event for our community. It's just getting into that discussion, getting into that movement. That's a lot to do with what you can do as an individual, because it feeds into the global society. It also is something that nowadays the top-down approach doesn't work. It's a bottom-up approach. Everyone's listening to people nowadays. You have more access through social media. You have more information about how your actions can actually have impact. So if you even have some small movement that you can share with the world, it does gain momentum. It does get heard by people who are making policies for you. It does get heard by people who are working as consultants for tech. It's working. There were so many examples of community movements being supported by organizations in their corporate social responsibility. So the world is going towards a more of an inclusive approach towards all of this, And that's where I think every individual is playing a much bigger role in the global society nowadays. Just beyond having that connectivity, it's also about your voice reaching many places and in many different ways. For someone like me, I started from India, I went to Indonesia, I went to UK, now I'm back in India. I have been on a very weird journey, but everywhere I know that there's probably maybe a very small movement and maybe not as significant in the global scheme, but I know that I've been a part of it. And I know that that might have even improved the life of one community, one person. It does give me that sense of belonging to this movement that, okay, I have done something for it. So the global society needs people to actually start working at an individual capacity, get your voice heard, talk to other people about it, reach people where you can actually see the impact happening, because that is where the change will start from. So this is where I said we will get a bit more into what mitigation and adaptation is, because those are the big words when we talk about climate change, and especially when we talk about big action in climate change, because these are mostly what governments and companies employ as their terminology. So when we talk about mitigation, it's about making the impact less severe. So it's not proactively fighting climate change, it's more about managing the challenges that arise from it. So is there anyone who has an example of any mitigation activities or policies they know happening in their countries or happening in their cities?
Yes. From Malawi. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, we can hear you.
Yeah, from Malawi. We most of the times we encourage community awareness concerning about the badness of climate change. So most of the times we go in the community and teach people about the badness of the climate change, what the climate change can brought about in the community. So most of the times we encourage people to use renewable energies like solar energy, wind energy, hydro, electric power energy. All this is to reduce gas emissions that can bring about climate change. So in short, I can say that.
Okay, that's actually really nice, because it's something that's also getting discussed right now. One of the panels that I attended recently, they were talking about how countries need to also include the aspect of distributional consequences when they're talking about introducing such activities into the community. So about how the community is supposed to adapt socially and economically to these changes. Because in the grander scheme of things, if they don't have the awareness, if they don't have the involvement in it, they don't know how to actually cope up with the change being implemented from probably from a top-down approach that they're not involved in.
Yes, sure, it is. I have.
Sorry, is someone saying something?
Yeah, I'm saying that I would like to suggest some of the things, like I have suggested and proposed some of the issues, like we must engage common people through the emotional connections and visual impacts, advocacy and messages. Actually, the issue is the common people does not know the research purpose and the scientific data. They don't know. So we need to tackle with these perspectives, like emotional connection, visual impacts, engaging communities, interactive installations like multimedia and so on, public spaces and transformation, like public spaces in worship places like temple, mosques and churches, like in Pakistan, there collaboration, storytelling through art, through theater, online engagement like we're doing. So these are the I think suggestions I am proposing to engage common people in like don't use very tough, we can say, terminology, be easy, be kind. So we can engage a common people in their level. So I want to.
That
You can
does.
share.
Yes, please.
Sorry, Ishita. Go ahead.
No, please, you were going to share something. Go.
Just a fairly common observation or report from where I live in London. London's aiming to go carbon neutral by 2030. So that involves things like, especially the transport network, making the buses run on sort of hydrogen fuels and other non sort of greenhouse gas mitigating infrastructure, as well as also increasing the increasing the availability of services locally. So the idea of what's called low traffic neighborhoods and 15-minute cities. So this idea of you can walk to most things that you need, like a supermarket, maybe leisure center, swimming pool, library, high street, within 15 minutes walk. So then you're less incentivized to use a car or even a train or even public transport. It's still fossil fuel usage. So trying to encourage walking in civil engineering, kind of city planning.
That's actually something that's interesting, because it's also where the point I said before about the global south and the north having this divide where the north is in a position where they can actually implement these solutions really fast. Having urban planning is not as challenging for Europe or for Britain as it would be for the global south. And that is where such mitigation challenges always have a problem. So in the global NDCs that countries have committed, a lot of the countries in the global south have committed to going carbon neutral as well. But that's where I see this challenge happening, that's a political commitment that has been made on a global platform. Countries are working towards it, but it's also adding so much pressure on developing countries where they don't know how to adapt and how to bring these solutions home to them, which is something that's becoming an increasing concern for a lot of people in the global south. That even if they are working on mitigation challenges, or even if they want to implement any of the strategies that London is thinking of implementing. For example, if I'm currently sitting in Jaipur, if I think about having a 15-minute concept here, the urban planning would be so complex that for them to adapt that as a solution is probably nearly impossible. It would take them the next 2-3 years just to figure out who can probably help them adapt it to their systems. So this is a mitigation challenge that is happening, and which is why I think the investment that's required in mitigation and adaptation is something that really needs to be looked into as a global community instead of just countries, because there's a very undue pressure on a lot of countries to rise up to the challenge. And no matter how much they want to, there are so many practical limitations that they're facing. Even when Mohammed spoke about the fact that scientific information and communication is a challenge for a lot of countries, for a lot of traditional communities, understanding the scientific methodology or understanding the reasoning behind climate change is still something they struggle with, because they come from practices where they may not be that open to a scientist's communication, or they might sometimes be the opposite. They're so focused on the scientific aspect of it, they're losing the traditional approach to it. So people are finding it hard to relate to these mitigation solutions in a tangible way, which is something that I think all countries are now working towards understanding that, okay, even if even India committed that by 2030, they're going to go carbon neutral. But now is when they're getting into the conversation that, okay, we're like 7 years away. How do we actually get people to accept it? How do we actually introduce EVs into our mobility? How do we make people switch from their traditional automobiles to an EV for climate? It costs a bit more. The social impact of that is really high. Setting up charging stations is something that has begun rampantly now, just because they foresee the challenge that, okay, even if we push people to change their vehicle, how are they supposed to actually adapt as a society to run the vehicle on the road? So this is where mitigation has that end goal limitation, where they're not reaching that last mile as well as they would hope, because connecting with their audiences or connecting with their population is something that a lot of people sort of in the hurry to respond to these challenges are overseeing. And that is where the human effect really comes in, where you need people to actually think about, okay, how do we get our society into this conversation? How do we engage with them? So if we move on to talk about adaptation, that is adjusting to future climates. Now, I personally prefer adaptation as an approach because I think it's much more proactive, and it helps with someone like me who gets anxious very easily when they read all the bad news that's coming our way. But the challenges with the adaptation are even more than mitigation. So this is where I don't know if anyone has any examples that they see of active adaptation from their countries, if anyone would like to share those. Because I'm always on the lookout for good examples that I can bring to my next discussion and say, okay, no, I see this working, please make it happen. This silence always makes me nervous. This is the challenge. We're in mitigation mode even now when we need to be in adaptive mode really badly.
Well, there is an example that I can think of from Turkey, but I am not sure if that's what you were looking for. Maybe you can tell me. So we have this that now for several years now we have to pay 25 so it's not Turkish, not the banknotes, but the ones, the coins, which is a lot for us. It's quite a lot to pay for a plastic bag. But before this practice, we were even asking, I mean, I was also doing that. So like when we were going to a supermarket, we would ask for several plastic bags because we were also using them in our rubbish bins, to put them out, because plastic bags doesn't really, there's no liquid that drips from it, so it's quite, it comes, it seems like it's convenient. But then as this thing has been introduced, and it's crazy for us to pay 25 coins to plastic bags, now we are quite mindful about our rubbish. Before we put juicy stuff, if we have to put it in the rubbish bins, we kind of like squeeze it and the tap, make it as dry as possible, and put it in the plastic bags, or in, like, now we have this organically made bags available. So the way our organization of rubbish have been transformed drastically, for which I'm quite glad. And I mean, this is one of the areas that I became aware that I wasn't before.
That is actually a good example, because that's something that's also happening in the global south, where there are countries that are banning plastic use, or at least single-use plastic, in a big way. So, but that's the thing, there's a very limited example of that, which is concerning. And the whole point of me bringing this to focus was because mitigation is only going to get us so far when we're in the crisis. So I think something that, if you get a chance to bring this discussion forward, try and think about more examples of adaptation, try and bring the conversation to an adaptive stage, because as you can see on the side, we're already at the temperature tipping points. We've already broken through them. So it's probably a good idea to start thinking about what we want to do as a society and how we actually want to go forward, because now we're going to start circling very soon. But yes, this brings me to one of my last slides before we go into the breakout rooms, which is about the fact that we need to make the actions much faster. Like I said before, it's a dynamic crisis. It keeps changing. It keeps becoming more severe. The longer it stays with us, it keeps getting more complex because of active challenges, because of foreseeing challenges, because of things that are continuing to impact us. And it's really important to also have that discussion where the speed and the way we're addressing these challenges needs to be rethought of, while we're addressing them. We don't have enough time to actually hit pause and say, okay, we can go for a brainstorming session. It has to be in parallel. So I don't know if anyone read about it, but the Earth system boundaries, there were 8 of them. And I think as of yesterday, it was reported that we've breached 7 of them. So we are at a stage where we really need to think fast about what we can do. And that is probably a good segue for our breakout sessions. So I think AJ and Grishma will lead you into your breakout rooms.
Thanks, Ishita. Very engaging presentation, a lot to take away from. So we can, I've put you into breakout rooms already, so you'll get a notification shortly. Just click to join the breakout rooms. And I guess in the breakout session, we can try and focus more on the mitigation versus adaptation and the solutions focus side of the discussion, which is a good segue from the end of Ishita's presentation. But also, feel free to share and try to get to know each other more, and the background of where we're all coming from our individual contexts about the problems as well. But I think if we can try and have in mind that it's going to be more of a solutions focused discussion, that should sort of target us a bit more. And also, if you'd like to nominate one person from your room, from your group, to feedback afterwards, we'll have about 10 minutes of discussion or so, 10, 15 minutes, we'll see how we go. And then we can feedback quickly. There's only going to be 3 rooms, so we'll feedback from the 3 rooms, and then we'll have the final closing remarks, if that's okay. I will open the rooms now. So you should be getting an invite to join the rooms. I'll see you shortly. Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. I hope you had a good discussion in your breakout rooms. Shall we go, just a quick feedback now. You don't have to summarize. I know sometimes these summary things can be quite long. You don't have to summarize every single point, but just 1 or 2 points that maybe you remember, you'll take away, or that even surprised you if you learned something new. Just 1 or 2 would be fine. You don't have to summarize the whole discussion. Should we go in, I think, room order? Ours was room 1, I think. Aisling, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so I think we covered a bit, I think, but things that stood out were about that the idea of importance of kind of political will. Like, I think there's a lot of individual will, maybe organizations, but the need for political will. But as part of that, the need for kind of trust and relationship between kind of politicians, but also between kind of individuals and communities. The idea of actually working together in kind of political kind of unions, but also working together on kind of a national level. And then just towards the end, there's things coming out about kind of almost corporations trying to blame consumers, and even though consumers are trying their best, there's maybe a bit of responsibility there that needs to be taken by corporations that is maybe being passed on. And I think we could have talked about that a lot more, but that's some of the things that came out.
Yeah, time as always is against us. Thanks, Aisling, which is why it's good that we have a series of these. We can always have more next time. To continue on that, room 2, I think that's with Elif and Ishita, that room. Who's feeding back?
Do you want to do the summary?
I think Sydney would be the perfect person to do that. She has great ideas, definitely.
Who's feeding back?
Sinead, I think. I don't know if she's participating in the main room. Okay, I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll take over.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
What was really interesting was talking about how we can incorporate religion into adaptive movements. So about having religious leaders actually talk about bringing religious practices into the modern world, adapting them to the climate crisis, bringing out aspects of religion that we think actually work for climate and highlighting those, or maybe just writing to religious leaders that, you know, as a movement, have the youth talk about, we need to incorporate these practices into our religious practices, into the teachings that the religion imparts on youth. And something that I took away from that was also the fact that having maybe figures that people can idolize, whether it's in your religion or even when you spoke about the political aspect of it, having a leader that you can say, okay, this leader is someone who I can relate to, I can adhere to their ideology, and I want to see my thoughts and what I want for my future reflected in the way they approach their actions. So.
Well, thank you, Ishita. Great stepping in last moment and giving such an excellent summary. And now the final room, room 3, which was Aparna, Sri, and Kondwani. Thank you.
Yeah. So my fellow roommates are having technical issues, so I think it just naturally falls upon me. So I think one of the key things that two key discussions were, one around the role of government, and the other was in education, particularly schools. So Rodina brought up this very particular point about the role of not just bringing in as a subject, but also like bringing it with other subjects as well, like possibly science and this thing, because I very much remember it's not a subject I engaged with a lot. It was actually very boring, to be frank. So I did not pay any attention to it. And I think a lot of thinking has to go around how to engage young people at the school level, particularly to think about, because I think a lot of, we're finding a lot of innovative solutions coming out of young people at the age. They're having fascinating models and solutions to think about that, but going at a young age, so that they actually start to practice like from a young age in their personal life, so that by the time they reach at an age, they can have an impact on the wider society. That can, it becomes naturally. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Aparna. Okay, so I think we'd pass now. Ishita, could you please close us out with some final thoughts?
So it was really good to hear what everyone was thinking about. That was really cool. And now that you've had your breakout session, something that I think I want you all to take away with you is, one, talking about what these new inventions also have an impact, as I think that was somebody who mentioned this before. I'm forgetting who. I think it was Ishvara, but somebody mentioned that new technologies also have a significant impact on climate. So something that I found rather funny was that there was a new large language model coming up for doing deep computing on climate aspects and making predictions for climate, which is good, because we need LLM models who can predict climate activities, which can predict a crisis that's impending, and maybe we can adapt to that. But these models themselves are not very sustainable. They require a lot of water input. They require a lot of power. There's a lot of backlog from what is happening for people to trade off the okay, you're working for climate. We're very happy you are. Thank you. Also want you to have a considerable assessment of what your climate footprint is going to be and how you it is about taking individual role to the next level. So the first step is always gain awareness. The second is get involved. What I mean by saying as most feasible is because I also see a lot of people feeling pressured about that they can't do enough. Everyone has different abilities. Everyone has different time that they can give to this. Everyone has different feasibility values for this. So think about what you can do in your capacity and to the best of your ability, instead of feeling pressured that you're not doing enough. It's just more important to look inside and introspect on what you can do. Find what you believe in is, I think, really important, because it can be a little disheartening to work in climate. You often see persistent challenges. They can have an emotional toll on you. They can have a mental toll on you. So it's always important to find what you're truly passionate about, where you can push through times when you feel a little probably let down by the movement around it. And also build your network. Engage with more panels like this. Go meet people with like-minded approach to this. Go talk to people who have a similar perspective, just to keep you on top of the discussion, or just to give you different perspectives as well. Panels like this, you talk to people from different backgrounds, you learn more about what's happening in their country, you learn about more examples, and you get more involved in this. So there are many ways that you can engage with climate, and you can engage with climate change, and I think it's wonderful to continue doing so. So thank you so much. And that's it from my side.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ishita, and everyone else for sharing the time with us. I think it was a wonderful, successful meeting, very much in the vein of the series. And do follow Religions for Peace on socials, so you can be informed of our next news and events. We can share the links in the chat, but you can just search Religions for Peace UK Interfaith Youth Network online. And with that, I think we can draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.
Before we leave, maybe we can take a screenshot, like photo, final photo.
Yeah, sure, that would be good. Yeah, please do turn on your cameras, and then who's taking the screenshot? Just give us a countdown.
Yeah. Waiting for. Yeah.
I can do.
Okay.
Okay, so are you ready, guys? Mohammed, would you like to be on the picture? Would you like to open your screen? If not, so okay, I can't.
No worries if not.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. Smile. Yay, done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Ishita. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ishita.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ishita. And also, guys, we have planned other events. So please join us on 19th.
On 14th.
14th first.
Sorry, 14th. Yeah, it's on this Monday.
We will have a discussion on sustainable architecture for a better tomorrow. So that will be like very interesting dialogue, and you can also share your thoughts on how to build and in a sustainable way for a better tomorrow. So please join on Monday and we can have more discussions. Thank you.